The screams echoed through Main Street like a banshee's wail, sending townsfolk diving behind barrels and scrambling into doorways. Sheriff Dalton Briggs pressed his back against the saloon's weathered wall, his weathered hand instinctively moving to his holster as hooves thundered past in a blur of midnight black. Thunder, that's what they called. The stallion had broken free from the rail yard again, and this time someone was going to die. "Dear God in heaven," whispered Mavis Thornton, the general store owner, as she peered through her window. "That devil horse is back." Thunder wasn't just any wild Mustang. Standing 17 hands high with a coat that seemed to absorb light itself, he was a living nightmare that had terrorized Copper Ridge for 3 months. The beast had trampled 2 men, destroyed countless storefronts, and sent more than a dozen folks to Doc Henley's clinic with broken bones and shattered nerves. Railroad workers had tried to capture him with nets, ropes, and even tranquilizer darts shipped in from the city, but Thunder seemed to anticipate their every move, turning more vicious with each failed attempt. "Sheriff," called out Virgil Moss from behind an overturned wagon. "He's heading toward the schoolhouse." Briggs felt his blood run cold. School had just let out, and children would be walking home along Elm Street. He'd seen what Thunder could do to grown men. The thought of those hooves anywhere near the town's children made his stomach churn. The stallion wheeled around the corner, his eyes wild with fury, foam flying from his muzzle. But something was different this time. Instead of the usual chaos of screaming and running, an eerie silence fell over the street. Thunder had stopped dead in his tracks, his massive head tilted toward the schoolyard. From where he stood, Briggs could hear it, to a soft, melodic humming that seemed to drift on the afternoon breeze like dandelion seeds. The sound was barely audible, yet it cut through the tension like a blade through silk. Thunder's ears pricked forward, and for the first time since anyone could remember, the great beast stood perfectly still. "What in Tarnation ... ... double quotes," Briggs muttered, creeping closer to get a better view. There, sitting on the schoolhouse steps with her back to the street, was Cordelia Ainsworth's youngest daughter, Juniper. The 12-year-old girl sat with her legs tucked beneath her faded blue dress, completely oblivious to the 2,000-pound killing machine standing not 30 feet away. She was singing something, a lullaby, perhaps, or an old folk song, her voice pure and clear as mountain spring water. Thunder took a tentative step forward, then another. His nostrils flared as he tested the air, but the rage that had driven him through the streets seemed to be draining away like water through a broken dam. The stallion's breathing slowed, his muscles relaxed, and that wild look in his eyes began to soften. Briggs couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Every instinct screamed at him to rush forward and snatch the girl to safety, but something held him back. Perhaps it was the way Thunder's head had lowered, or how the horse's ears had swiveled forward in curiosity rather than aggression. Whatever dark magic was at work here, the sheriff knew better than to interfere. The girl's song continued, weaving through the air like a spell, and Thunder took another step closer. Juniper Ainsworth had always been different from the other children. In Copper Ridge, at 12, she possessed an otherworldly quality that made adults uncomfortable and children wary. Her grandmother, Celestine, had been the same way, a woman who could calm storms with whispered words and heal wounds with her touch. The townsfolk had called her a witch behind closed doors, though they'd never dared say it to her face. The song Juniper hummed was one Celestine had taught her years ago, before consumption had claimed the old woman's life. It was a song in the old tongue, passed down through generations of women who understood that some creatures needed healing more than taming. As thunder drew closer, Juniper slowly turned her head. Most people would have screamed at the sight of the massive stallion looming over them, but Juniper saw something different in those dark eyes. Where others saw rage and wildness, she saw pain-deep, soul-crushing pain that had driven the beautiful creature to madness. "Hello, beautiful," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're hurting, aren't you?" Thunder's head dropped lower, and Juniper could see the scars. Rope burns around his neck, whip marks across his flanks, and something else, a brand on his shoulder that made her heart ache. The mark was fresh, maybe a few months old, and it told a story of cruelty that no living thing should endure. Sheriff Briggs watched in stunned silence as the girl slowly extended her hand. Every muscle in his body was coiled tight, ready to spring into action if Thunder showed even the slightest sign of aggression. But the stallion only sniffed delicately at her palm, then gently touched his muzzle to her fingers. "What happened to you?" Juniper asked, her voice heavy with compassion. "Who hurt you so badly that you've forgotten how to trust?" The answer came not in words but in images that flashed through her mind, a gift her grandmother had warned her about. She saw Thunder as a young colt running free across endless prairies with his family. Then came the men with their ropes and cruel intentions. She saw him torn away from everything he loved, forced into railroad cars with dozens of other terrified horses. But the worst was yet to come. A man with cold eyes and a heart to match had bought Thunder for his private collection. For months, the stallion had endured beatings, starvation, and torments designed to break his spirit. When Thunder had finally fought back, seriously injuring his tormentor, the man had branded him with a hot iron and left him to die in the desert. Somehow, Thunder had survived, but the experience had left him so traumatized that the sight of any human sent him into a murderous rage. Until now, Juniper's eyes filled with tears as the visions faded. "Oh, you poor, sweet boy," she murmured, slowly rising to her feet. "No wonder you're so angry. But that's not who you really are, is it?" Thunder whickered softly, a sound that made several onlookers gasp in amazement. This was the first time anyone had heard the stallion make a sound that wasn't a scream of rage or challenge. "My name is Juniper," she said, taking a small step closer, "and I promise you I will never hurt you. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" The stallion's response was to lower his great head until his forehead touched hers. The gesture was so gentle, so full of trust, that Sheriff Briggs felt his throat tighten with emotion. In 30 years of law enforcement, he'd never seen anything like it, but their moment of connection was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. A group of armed men was riding hard down Main Street, led by a man in an expensive suit, whose face was twisted with fury. "There he is," the man shouted. "There's my property." Juniper felt Thunder's muscles tense beneath her touch, and she knew with crystal clarity that their peaceful moment was about to shatter. Montgomery Ashford cut an imposing figure as he rode into Copper Ridge with his hired guns flanking him, like vultures. His suit was tailored from the finest Eastern fabrics, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and his silver-handled revolver gleamed in the afternoon sun. But it was his eyes that truly unnerved Sheriff Briggs, cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of mercy. "That's my horse," Ashford declared, dismounting with practiced arrogance, "and I've come to collect what's mine." Briggs stepped forward, his badge catching the light. "Mr. Ashford, I presume. I'm Sheriff Briggs. That animal has been terrorizing." our town for months. If he's truly yours, then you're responsible for considerable property damage, and I don't care about your petty concerns." "Sheriff," Ashford interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain, "Thunder is worth more than this. Entire backwater town. He's a descendant of the great Mustang bloodlines, and I paid a fortune for him." Juniper had positioned herself between Thunder and the approaching men, her small frame a stark contrast to the massive stallion behind her. She could feel the horse's fear radiating off him in waves, his muscles coiled tight as a spring. The gentle creature she'd been communing with was rapidly disappearing, replaced by the traumatized animal these men had created. "He's not property," Juniper said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. "He's a living being who deserves kindness, not cruelty." Ashford's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Kindness? That beast nearly killed me. Put me in the hospital for 3 weeks and scarred me for life." He pulled back his sleeve to reveal angry red marks along his forearm. "Cost me thousands in medical bills and months of lost business. He's going to pay for what he did to me." "And what did you do to him first?" Juniper asked, her young voice carrying a weight of accusation that made several townspeople shift uncomfortably. Ashford's face darkened. "I was breaking him, as is my right as his owner. Horses need to learn their place, and this one was particularly stubborn. But I'll finish the job now." He gestured to his men, who began advancing with ropes and whips. Thunder reared up on his hind legs, his scream of fury echoing off the buildings. But instead of charging forward as everyone expected, he moved to shield Juniper with his body, creating a wall of muscle and determination between her and the approaching threat. "Stand down," Sheriff Briggs barked, his hand moving to his weapon. "I won't have violence in my town." "This is a private matter, Sheriff," Ashford snarled. "That horse belongs to me, and I have every legal right to reclaim my property." "Legal right, maybe," came a new voice from the crowd. Doc Henley pushed through the gathering townsfolk, his medical bag in one hand and a rolled-up newspaper in the other. "But perhaps you'd like to explain this first." He unrolled the paper to reveal a wanted poster with Ashford's face prominently displayed. The headline read, "Wanted for animal cruelty and fraud. Montgomery Ashford, $500 reward." Ashford's face went pale. That's impossible. Those charges were dropped." "Dropped in Colorado, maybe," Doc Henley said with grim satisfaction. "But it seems the authorities in Wyoming have some questions about your business practices, particularly regarding the mysterious deaths of several prize horses in your care." The crowd began to murmur angrily. Copper Ridge might be a small town, but they had strong feelings about folks who mistreated animals. Several men stepped forward, their faces hard with purpose. "Now see here," Ashford blustered, but his confidence was cracking. "I demand you arrest that girl for interfering with my property." "The only person getting arrested here is you," Briggs said, stepping forward with his handcuffs ready. "You're wanted for questioning in 3 states, Mr. Ashford. I'll be happy to escort you to the marshal's office." Thunder whinnied softly, and Juniper reached up to stroke his neck. The stallion's muscles were still tense, but she could feel his trust in her growing stronger. Together, they watched as the sheriff approached the man who had caused so much pain. But Ashford wasn't finished yet. His hand moved toward his weapon, and Juniper saw the desperation in his eyes. A desperate man with a gun was the most dangerous kind of enemy. "Nobody moves," Ashford shouted, drawing his revolver. "I'm taking my horse and leaving, and anyone who tries to stop me will regret it." The afternoon sun seemed to pause in its descent as Montgomery Ashford's revolver gleamed in the golden light. Every person on Main Street held their breath, waiting to see if the wealthy man's desperation would lead to bloodshed. Sheriff Briggs had his own weapon half drawn, but Ashford's gun was already trained on the crowd. "Back away from my horse," Ashford commanded, his voice cracking with barely controlled panic. "All of you. That animal cost me everything, and I'm not leaving without him." Juniper felt Thunder's muscles bunch beneath her touch, and she knew the stallion was preparing to charge. The sight of Ashford's weapon had triggered something primal in the horser, memory of pain and terror that threatened to overwhelm the fragile trust they'd built. "Easy, boy," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Don't let his anger become yours." But Thunder was barely listening. His eyes had locked onto Ashford's face, and 18 months of pent-up rage was building to an explosive climax. The stallion's nostrils flared, his breathing grew harsh, and everyone could see the wildness returning to his eyes. "That's it," Ashford shouted triumphantly. "Come on, you devil. Show them what you really are." The taunt was a mistake. Thunder's scream of fury split the air like a thunderclap, and he launched himself forward with the force of a locomotive. Ashford's gun went off, the bullet whistling harmlessly over the stallion's head. But Thunder's momentum carried him straight toward his tormentor. What happened next would be talked about in Copper Ridge for generations to come. Just as Thunder's hooves were about to strike Ashford down, Juniper's voice rose above the chaos. Not shouting or screaming, but singing the same haunting melody that had first calmed the stallion. Her voice was clear and pure, cutting through the noise like a silver blade through silk. Thunder's front hooves hit the ground mere inches from Ashford's face, sending up a cloud of dust. The stallion's eyes were wild with fury, his teeth bared in a snarl that promised death. But Juniper's song wrapped around him like a gentle embrace, and slowly, so slowly that the watching crowd held their collective breath, the rage began to drain from his expression. "Remember who you really are," Juniper sang, the words weaving through the ancient melody. "Remember the meadows and the wind. Remember the taste of sweet grass and the warmth of the sun on your back. Remember freedom, not fear." Thunder's head turned toward her, and she saw the exact moment when recognition dawned in his dark eyes. The wild stallion that had terrorized Copper Ridge for months flickered and faded. Replaced by the magnificent creature he had been before, cruelty had twisted his soul with infinite gentleness. Thunder stepped back from Ashford's prone form and walked to Juniper's side. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the 12-year-old girl placed her small hand on the stallion's neck, and he lowered his head to nuzzle her shoulder. "How ... Ashford whispered from where he lay in the dust. "How did you do that?" Juniper looked down at him with eyes that seemed far older than her 12 years. "I showed him something you never did," she said simply. "Kindness." Sheriff Briggs moved forward to disarm Ashford, but the fight had gone out of the man entirely. He submitted to arrest without resistance, his gaze never leaving Thunder's calm face. "That's impossible," Ashford muttered as the handcuffs clicked shut. "I tried everything to break him. Whips, spurs, starvation, ... Nothing worked." "That's because you were trying to break something that was already broken," Doc Henley observed, approaching with his medical bag to check on Ashford's injuries. "Sometimes the only way to fix something is to love it back together." As the sheriff led Ashford away, Thunder remained perfectly calm beside Juniper. The transformation was so complete that several townspeople rubbed their eyes, wondering if they were seeing things correctly. "What happens now?" asked Mavis Thornton, still peering nervously from her store window. Juniper looked up at Thunder, then at the gathered crowd. Now, she said with a smile, we find out what freedom really means. 3 weeks after the confrontation with Montgomery, Ashford Copper Ridge had transformed into something resembling a pilgrimage site. Word had spread throughout the territory about the girl who could calm wild horses with a song, and visitors arrived daily hoping to witness the miracle for themselves. Juniper found the attention overwhelming. She'd always been a quiet child, more comfortable with animals than people, and the constant stream of curious onlookers made her anxious. But Thunder seemed to understand her discomfort, positioning himself between her and the crowds like a four-legged guardian angel. They'd established a routine. Each morning, Juniper would walk to the meadow behind the schoolhouse where Thunder grazed freely. The stallion could have left any time he wanted. No fence or rope constrained him, but he chose to stay near the girl who had saved his soul. You don't have to protect me, Juniper told him one morning as they sat together in the tall grass. I know you're still afraid they'll try to hurt you again. Thunder's response was to lower his great head and breathe softly against her hair. In the weeks since Ashford's arrest, the stallion had begun to remember what it felt like to trust, not just Juniper, though she remained his anchor, but the entire community that had welcomed him despite his violent past. Doc Henley had been particularly helpful, using his veterinary knowledge to tend to Thunder's old injuries. The rope burns had healed, and the brand on his shoulder was fading. More importantly, the invisible wounds were beginning to close as well. He's not the same horse, Sheriff Briggs observed one afternoon as he watched Thunder allow a group of children to pet his neck. 3 weeks ago, he would have killed anyone who came near him. He was never that horse, Juniper replied, brushing Thunder's mane with gentle strokes. He was just scared and hurt. Wouldn't you be angry if someone had treated you that way? The sheriff had to admit she had a point. The stories that had emerged about Montgomery Ashford's treatment of his horses were enough to turn even the strongest stomach. The man was currently awaiting trial in the territorial capital, where he faced charges of animal cruelty, fraud, and assault. But Thunder's healing had brought unexpected benefits to Copper Ridge. The railroad, grateful that their wild horse problem had been solved without bloodshed, had donated funds to improve the town's school. Several wealthy horse enthusiasts had offered to buy Thunder for astronomical sums, but Juniper had politely declined them all. He's not for sale, she told each disappointed buyer. He's home now. The transformation extended beyond just Thunder. Juniper herself had grown more confident, her quiet wisdom attracting people from across the territory who sought her advice about their own troubled animals. A rancher from 3 counties over brought his vicious bull. A traveling circus owner came with a lion that had lost its will to perform. Even a railroad executive arrived with a carriage horse that had developed an inexplicable fear of bridges. In each case, Juniper would listen to their stories, then spend time with the animal in question. She never used force or coercion. Patience, understanding, and that mysterious gift that seemed to flow through her grandmother's bloodline. You have a calling, Doc Henley told her one evening as they watched Thunder play with a group of local horses that had accepted him into their herd. I've never seen anything like what you can do. Juniper smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. Grandma Celestine always said gifts like this come with a price. I can feel their pain, Doc. Every hurt they've ever experienced. Sometimes it's overwhelming, but you keep doing it anyway. He observed, because someone has to, she said simply. And if I can help them remember who they really are underneath all that hurt, then maybe the pain is worth it. Thunder whinnied softly from where he stood with his new friends, and Juniper's smile brightened. Whatever price her gift demanded, she'd gladly pay it to see that look of peace in his eyes. But their story wasn't over yet. Change was coming to Copper Ridge, and with it, a test that would challenge everything Juniper had learned about healing broken spirits. 1 year later, Copper Ridge had become a destination for those seeking hope. The town had grown by nearly 50%, with new businesses opening to serve the steady stream of visitors, who came to witness what locals called the miracle of Thunder's Meadow. Juniper, now 13 and taller by several inches, had grown into her gift with remarkable grace. She'd established a small sanctuary behind the schoolhouse where troubled animals could find healing and peace. Thunder remained her constant companion and co-therapist, somehow understanding exactly which animals needed his calm presence and which required gentler intervention. The sanctuary had become home to an unlikely family, Thunder, 3 rescue horses rescued from various forms of abuse, a blind mule named Patience, 2 former circus bears, and a wolf with a permanently damaged leg. Each animal had arrived broken in some way, but under Juniper's care, they'd learned to trust again. On this particular morning, as golden autumn light filtered through the cottonwood trees, Juniper was expecting a very special visitor. A telegram had arrived 3 days prior from the territorial governor, asking if she would consider helping with a unique situation involving a horse that belonged to the state. Sheriff Briggs, now graying at the temples but still sharp as a tack, accompanied the official delegation when they arrived. The governor himself had come, along with a small cavalry unit and a horse trailer that looked more like a mobile prison. "Miss Ainsworth," the governor said, removing his hat respectfully, "I've heard remarkable things about your work with traumatized animals. We have a situation that requires your particular expertise." The horse they brought was a magnificent black stallion, smaller than Thunder but equally powerful. His name was Midnight, and he had been the pride of the territorial cavalry until a disastrous battle with hostile raiders had left him the sole survivor of his unit. For 8 months, he'd refused to allow anyone near him, striking out at any human who approached. "The army wants to put him down," the governor explained quietly, "but I thought perhaps, well, if anyone could help him, it would be you." Juniper studied Midnight through the bars of his transport. The stallion was pressed against the far wall, his eyes wide with terror and rage. But beneath the fear, she could see something else, a devastating loneliness that made her heart ache. "He watched his friends die," she said softly. "He thinks he should have died with them." Thunder approached the trailer and nickered gently. Midnight's ears pricked forward, and for a moment his defensive posture relaxed. The 2 stallions regarded each other with the understanding that only horses could share. "Give me 3 days, Juniper said, "but I need everyone to leave. No soldiers, no officials, no curious onlookers. Just me, Thunder, and him." The governor hesitated. "Miss Ainsworth, this animal is extremely dangerous. We can't leave you alone. With you can, and you will." Sheriff Briggs interrupted. "I've seen what this young lady can do. If anyone can help that horse, it's her." The next 3 days passed in a blur of patient work. Juniper didn't try to force contact with Midnight. Instead, she simply existed in his presence, singing the old songs while Thunder grazed nearby. She talked to him about the war, about loss, about the heavy burden of survival guilt that both horses and humans could carry. On the 3rd day, as The morning mist was lifting from the meadow. Midnight finally approached the fence where Juniper sat. His movements were cautious, but the wild rage had faded from his eyes. "I know you miss them," Juniper whispered. "I know you think you should have saved them. But you living isn't a betrayal of their memory, it's a tribute to it." Midnight touched his nose to her outstretched hand, and Juniper felt the familiar flood of images. The battle, the screams of wounded horses, the terrible silence that followed. But also deeper memories of loyalty, courage, and love for the humans who had cared for him. When the governor returned with his delegation, they found Midnight and Thunder grazing peacefully side by side while Juniper sat beneath a tree reading a book. The transformation was so complete that several officials questioned whether they were looking at the same horse. "How do you do it?" the governor asked in wonder. Juniper looked up from her book, then at Thunder and Midnight, then at the growing collection of rescued animals that had found peace in their unlikely sanctuary. "I just remind them of something they forgot," she said simply, "that they're worthy of love just as they are." The governor offered to buy the land and establish an official animal rescue facility with Juniper as its director. The railroad offered to build a special train car to transport troubled animals from across the country. Famous trainers begged to study her methods, but Juniper's answer was always the same. "This isn't about methods or techniques. It's about seeing the soul beneath the scars and choosing to love what you find there." As the officials prepared to leave, entrusting Midnight to Juniper's care, Sheriff Briggs pulled her aside. "You know you're going to be famous," he said with a smile. "People will write books about what you've done here." Juniper laughed, watching as Thunder and Midnight played together in the meadow like old friends. "I don't need to be famous, Sheriff. I just need to be useful." Thunder raised his head and whinnied, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the valley. In that moment, Sheriff Briggs understood that fame and fortune were pale shadows compared to the gift of healing broken spirits. Copper Ridge had found its miracle, not in spectacle or sensation, but in the simple truth that love could overcome any trauma. And that sometimes the most profound healing happened not with grand gestures, but with quiet songs sung to wild hearts learning to trust again. The sanctuary grew, the animals healed, and Juniper's gift continued to touch lives across the territory. But every evening, as the sun set over the meadow, she would sit with Thunder and remember that first day when a feared wild horse had chosen to trust a girl with a song. It was, she reflected, the most perfect ending she could have imagined.